Three men, a darkened apartment, a gun pressed to a man's head in the dead of night. Is this him? The answer was no. So they moved on, deeper into the apartment, to the room where Stephen Davis lay sleeping. What followed next lasted only seconds. A yell. 3, maybe 4 shots fired in rapid succession. Then silence. Then running footsteps disappearing down the stairs. By the time anyone reached Stephen's room, it was already over. He was 31 years old, a gentle, funny British man from Nottingham who had crossed the world chasing a better life, and found it. A good job, a beautiful family, a wife he called his princess. He thought he was safe. He thought he was loved. He was wrong. And the woman who sent those men into that apartment? She was sitting in a car outside, waiting. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to a small island in the Philippines, back to a bar where a young girl danced for strangers, back to the moment two very different worlds collided, and the slow, devastating unraveling that followed. Stephen Davis grew up in Nottingham, England, the kind of son every mother dreams of raising. Warm, loyal, responsible beyond his years. His sisters remember him as playful, light-hearted, full of bad jokes delivered with a smirk that somehow made them funny anyway. He was the kind of person, as one person close to him put it, who simply wouldn't hurt anybody. But life dealt Stephen an early blow. When he was just 14 years old, his father died suddenly. Overnight, the playful boy became something else, a young man who felt the weight of the family on his shoulders. He stepped into the role of protector. He looked after his mother, Margaret. He looked after his sisters. He became, in every sense, the man of the house before he was even old enough to shave. Margaret watched her son carry that burden with both pride and heartache. She wished he would go out more, party, be young. Instead, Stephen poured himself into computers, his great passion, his path forward. Things slowly improved when Margaret found love again with a man named Alan, who stepped into a mentor role for Stephen. For the first time in years, Stephen had a male figure in his corner, someone to lighten the load he'd been carrying alone. And Stephen was good at what he did. Very good. So good that at just 21 years old, a computer company came knocking with an offer that would change his life forever. Triple his salary, pack his bags, and move to Hong Kong. Margaret encouraged him. She believed in him completely. She wanted him to see what he was capable of. So Stephen Davis left Nottingham and walked straight into a world he was completely unprepared for. On the other side of the planet, on a remote Philippine island that could only be reached by boat, an island with no running water, no electricity, and no sanitation, a girl named Evelyn was growing up. By all accounts, she was obedient, quiet, helpful. Fell ill, she washed clothes and made matches to sell just to help her family survive. But even as a small child, Evelyn had a very specific dream. When adults asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, her answer was always the same: a bar girl. So she could marry an American. By the time she was 13 years old, Evelyn left her island and began a 2-day journey by boat and bus to a place called Angeles City. It was the only way out of poverty she could see. Angeles City was known throughout the Philippines as the sex capital of the country. The bars there were the primary economic opportunity for girls who arrived from rural villages, young women desperate to earn money to send back to their families. In some establishments, girls were as young as 12. They earned the equivalent of £1 a night for dancing, up to £5 if they slept with a customer. There was a premium rate for virgins. Evelyn lied about her age to get work. She used drugs to cope with what she had to do. Her family back on the island cried when they found out she was just a child. But they understood. They were poor, There was no other way. The only real escape for girls like Evelyn was to find a wealthy foreign boyfriend, to be rescued. Evelyn was about to find hers. Stephen had taken up a new hobby after arriving in Asia. He'd joined a flying club in Angeles City, just 2 hours from Hong Kong. It was a place where professionals came to unwind, surrounded by nightlife and women. Friends who knew Stephen from that time remember that women were drawn to him. He was a big guy with blonde hair, a pale face, a smirk, and a genuinely funny sense of humor that he wielded badly. But somehow, it worked. Then one night, Stephen walked into a bar and saw Evelyn. He was completely smitten. He took her out for the night. And then he did something that would shock his family back in England. He paid the bar owner £500 to ensure she would never have to go back. He believed with his whole heart that he was rescuing her. His friends who knew the Philippines understood, even if they didn't fully approve. His mother, Margaret, when she heard, didn't know what these bars actually were. She thought of a pub. She was naive, she later admitted. And when she finally understood, she found it difficult to be angry, because she also saw what Stephen saw. Girls who were beautiful, kind-seeming, and deeply undeserving of the lives they'd been forced into. Stephen would say it simply, "If you can rescue just one girl from that life, that's what I've done. I've rescued her." Evelyn was 17, Stephen was 27, and he was already in love. Stephen arranged for his mother Margaret and her partner Alan to visit Hong Kong, where they met Evelyn for the first time. Margaret still remembers it vividly. Evelyn was quiet, polite, and utterly beautiful. She could see exactly why Stephen had fallen for her. Stephen had a surprise prepared. He'd bought Evelyn a stunning white suit, something close to £500, and he'd arranged a ceremony. The occasion was delayed, though, because Evelyn couldn't read the vows. She had never been to school. Margaret pulled her son aside. She asked him quietly if he knew what he was doing. She had concerns, not about Evelyn specifically, but about the situation. A friend of Stephen's, who was closer to the Philippine bar world, was more direct. There were questions, he felt, about the judgment involved in marrying a bar girl and someone so young, from such a radically different world. But Stephen was certain. He loved her. She was the one. She was going to be the mother of his children, and no one could talk him out of it. The years that followed looked, on the surface, like a fairy tale. Or at least the version of one that Stephen had always wanted to give her. He and Evelyn moved to Angeles City and rented a house in the most expensive neighborhood. Stephen was earning £60,000 a year as a computer technician. Extraordinary money in the Philippines. He gave Evelyn a monthly allowance of £1,000. He employed maids to handle the housework. When Evelyn wanted to stay in bed all day while the maids looked after their children, he let her. "She doesn't have to do anything, Mom," he told Margaret. "She's my princess." Their daughter Jessica was born first. Then, 2 years later, their son Joshua. Stephen's generosity didn't stop with Evelyn. He sent large sums of money back to her family on the island. Enough to buy a fishing boat, enough to build the only brick house in the entire village. He paid her family's fares to visit. He treated them like his own. But Margaret and Alan, visiting every year with their video camera, were beginning to notice things. Small things at first. On Stephen and Evelyn's honeymoon in Puerto Galera, which Stephen had invited his mother and stepfather on, wanting to share his happiness, Margaret noticed that whenever Stephen reached for Evelyn's hand as they walked, Evelyn would pull her shoulder away. "These were the small things," she said quietly, "that only a mother notices." Then the things started going missing. Pillows, a rice maker, a water filter, gone after Evelyn's family visited, and Evelyn would simply shrug. We'll buy more. Then came something far harder to dismiss: Evelyn's text messages, the giggling when she thought no one was watching, the way her entire demeanor shifted, cold toward Stephen, always angry at him, and secretive in a way that felt deliberate. Margaret didn't say it out loud yet, but she felt it. It was Evelyn's own sister, Gina, who finally confirmed what everyone suspected. Working in the house as a nanny to the children, Gina confronted Evelyn directly, and Evelyn admitted it. She was having an affair. The man's name was Arnold Adorai. He was a local security guard. He earned £1,000 per year, the same as Evelyn's monthly allowance from Stephen. But Evelyn would deny it entirely when pressed. She denied the affair, denied everything. Meanwhile, the cracks in the marriage were becoming craters. Money was disappearing in alarming ways. Stephen had given Evelyn the nursery school fees for Jessica. One day, acting on instinct, he decided to personally take his daughter to school and discovered that Jessica wasn't even enrolled. She had never been enrolled. The money had vanished. And when he investigated further, he discovered Evelyn had pawned her own wedding ring. The money, it later emerged, had been used to buy Arnold Adorai a motorbike. Stephen told his mother what was happening. He sounded exhausted and humiliated. "She's really messed up this time, Mum," he said. He gave Evelyn an ultimatum: return the money, get a job, or go to college. When she refused to do any of it, he threatened divorce. And then he did something that changed the entire equation. He stopped her allowance. Suddenly, Evelyn was facing the unthinkable. Without Stephen's money, she couldn't support the vast network of family and friends who had come to depend on her. Without Stephen, she would lose everything she had built: the house, the status, the power. And without his money, she would be exactly where she started: poor, uneducated, and back on that island, or worse, back in the bars. A friend of Stephen's had warned him around this time, told him to be careful, that some of these people could be dangerous, and Stephen had laughed it off with a line that still haunts those who heard it: "They wouldn't hurt me. I'm the golden goose." His friend had looked at him and said, "Stephen, you forget the moral of the story. They killed the golden goose." They had another beer and laughed. Stephen and his friend Mike were staying in their business apartment in Manila. It was an ordinary night. They went to sleep. At some point in the darkness, 3 men broke in. Mike woke up first. A gun was pressed to his head. A voice asked, "Is this him?" Mike said no. The men moved on, down the hallway, to the room where Stephen was sleeping. Then Mike heard it: a yell, Stephen's voice, and simultaneously 3 or 4 shots. Then running. Then silence. Mike went to Stephen's room. He checked for a pulse. There was none. He went downstairs, found a neighbor, and called the police. And in that raw, unfiltered moment of shock and grief, he turned to the neighbor and said, without thinking, without evidence, purely from instinct, that Evelyn had done this. Margaret got the call that morning. Alan was in the garden. She picked up the phone, and the world fell apart. She kept repeating it. He can't be dead. Not Stephen. Not her Stephen. She was on a plane to the Philippines within days. At the funeral parlor in the Philippines, Margaret watched her daughter-in-law carefully. Evelyn sat across the room and never came to them. Never embraced them. Never shed a single tear. Not that Margaret ever witnessed. And then Evelyn said something that made Margaret's blood run cold. Standing in front of Stephen's coffin, Evelyn leaned toward Margaret and asked, "Have you seen Mike?" Not, "I can't believe he's gone." Not, "What are we going to do?" Not, I'm so sorry." She asked about Mike. Margaret pulled out her notebook and began writing down every single word, every single interaction. The police investigation was moving slowly. Their first theory centered on someone from Stephen's company. It went nowhere. So Margaret did something that would define the next 2.5 years of her life. She hired her own private investigator, a former policeman, and she paid out of her own pocket for surveillance, witness interviews, and police petrol money when the local force couldn't afford to work the case themselves. She wasn't going home. Not without answers. The surveillance paid off. 2 men were making regular visits to Evelyn's home. Arnold Aderai, the lover, and a friend of his. Another security guard. Margaret passed their identities to the police. Mike was brought in. He looked at the men and recognized their eyes. "Those are the same eyes that were going to gun me down," he said. He was 100% certain. Both men were arrested. But Margaret was warned that people connected to the accused now knew who she was. Her life, and Alan's, was in danger. She left the Philippines, but not empty-handed. Before she left, Margaret made a decision, one that was desperate and controversial and driven by a mother's ferocious instinct. She was taking Stephen's children home with her. She persuaded Evelyn to let 3-year-old Jessica stay for a weekend visit. A few days later, Margaret boarded a plane to England with her granddaughter and did not bring her back. Joshua was harder. He was with Evelyn's parents on the island. Margaret sent her investigator with a cash offer of £200. Evelyn's mother, heartbroken but practical, agreed. She knew she couldn't give him what Margaret could. She wept as the boy was taken away. 2 months after fleeing the Philippines, Margaret stood at Heathrow Airport and held Stephen's infant son in her arms. He was dressed in a pyramid print sock, baby girl socks with the legs cut off because nothing else fit, and a British supermarket nappy. She held him and thought of Stephen. For 2 years, Margaret worked every single day, and often through the night, to build the case. She spent £55,000 of her own money. She maintained contact with Evelyn's own relatives who had quietly turned against her. And then came the breakthrough. A man named Robin Bootus, Evelyn's brother-in-law, married to her sister Gina, had been acting suspiciously since the night of the murder. Every time police tried to question him, he disappeared. But Evelyn's aunts knew where he was, and they helped Margaret bring him in. When Robin Bootus finally talked, everything unraveled. He admitted he had been the 3rd man that night. He told police exactly what happened. Evelyn, Arnold Aderai, and Aderai's friend had driven together to the Manila apartment. The 3 men went upstairs. Evelyn stayed in the car as the lookout. Aderai was the one who fired the gun. 2 shots, then 2 more. Evelyn had told people for years that Stephen was a millionaire, that when he died, she would inherit everything. Robin's confession gave prosecutors what they needed. In February 2004, Evelyn was arrested and charged with murder. Even though she hadn't pulled the trigger herself, under Philippine law, she could be found guilty for planning the killing. Her lover and his accomplice had already been convicted of murder. Both were serving life sentences. Robin Bootus was released in exchange for his testimony. Now it was Evelyn's turn. The trial lasted months. 14 witnesses gave evidence against Evelyn. Not a single witness could corroborate her version of events. The men who broke into the apartment had a key they couldn't have obtained without inside help. A neighbor had seen Evelyn return home in the early hours of the morning on the night of the murder, destroying her alibi that she'd been asleep at home. Margaret flew back to the Philippines for the verdict. She sat in that courtroom with butterflies churning in her stomach after 2.5 years of fighting, grieving, spending, investigating and refusing, absolutely refusing to let her son's death go unanswered. The judge spoke the words that Margaret had crossed the world to hear. The court found Evelyn Bohol Davis, also known as Evelyn Davis, guilty beyond reasonable doubt of murder, qualified by treachery, and sentenced her to suffer the penalty of reclusion perpetua. Life in prison, 40 years, no possibility of early release. Margaret sat with it for a moment. Then she said quietly, "There is no pleasure in seeing Evelyn go to prison. No matter what happens, it will never bring my son back." Before leaving the Philippines, Margaret did one final thing. She went to the jail and asked to see Evelyn face to face. Evelyn denied everything. Still, even then, she looked at Margaret and said she had never had a relationship with Adorai, that she had been the perfect wife, that she had loved Stephen. "Even if I die now," she said, "I never have a relationship with him." Margaret didn't rage. She didn't collapse. She looked at the young woman she had once held in her arms, whom she had once cherished as a daughter-in-law, and she felt pity. She told Evelyn that Jessica and Joshua cried for her, that they wanted their mummy, and then she held out photographs, pictures of the children growing up in England. Jessica standing by the house with the blue gates, the house she had once shared with Stephen. Jessica with Margaret, labeled Mummy and Nana. Evelyn looked at the photographs, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Margaret told her she would send pictures as the children grew, that they would always know they had a beautiful mother, that they would always be her children. And then she said goodbye. Evelyn did not stand up. Margaret walked out of the prison, leaving behind a letter. In it, she wrote, "You are convicted of the murder of your husband, Stephen. Nothing you say will convince me that you're innocent. You will spend the next 40 years in jail. You'll be an old woman with a wasted life. Stephen called you his princess and loved you very much. You are a very evil woman, with no thought of the lives you have ruined. You took my son. Now I have yours, and your daughter, who someday will come and ask, 'Mummy, why? Why were you so bad? Why did you leave us? Why did you kill our daddy? I will never forgive you, or see you ever again. You are no longer a daughter of mine.'" Stephen Davis believed he was invincible because he was useful. Because without him, everything falls apart. Because no one destroys the thing that keeps them alive. He called himself the Golden Goose, and he forgot, just like his friend warned him, that in the end, someone always kills the golden goose. His children are growing up in Nottingham now. They look at a star sometimes on clear nights, and their grandmother Margaret tells them, "That's your daddy. He's up there watching over you." Stephen Davis was 31 years old. He had bad jokes and a better smirk. He flew planes for fun and thought the best of people. He just wanted to rescue someone. The question that lingers, the one that keeps this story alive long after the verdict, is whether Evelyn ever truly understood what she had. A man who crossed the world for her, who called her his princess, who built her a life from nothing and asked for nothing but to be loved in return, or whether, from the very beginning, love was never part of the arrangement at all.